In the pantheon of video games, there are some whose stories must be told. And amongst those, one of the most terrifying and yet inspiring is Jill Valentine from the Resident Evil series. While she would go on to star in many of the Resident Evil games, it was in the first Resident Evil where she first debuted. This is the story of Jill Valentine in Resident Evil. In July of 1998, a number of bizarre murders take place on the outskirts of the Midwestern town of Raccoon City. After Bravo Team from the Special Unit Stars are sent and never return, Alpha Team, of which Jill Valentine is a member, is sent to ascertain what has happened to them and what has led to these brutal murders. What they find is worse than they could have possibly imagined. Finding the mutilated remains of Bravo Team, Jill and her friends are soon set upon by what appear to be rabid dogs pursuing them with brutal intent. They flee towards what seems to be the safety of the Spencer mansion, but once inside, things go from bad to worse. Only Jill, along with Barry and Wesker, make it inside the mansion, and as they separate to explore, it is Jill who finds the first terrifying hint of what they're facing. The reanimated dead are attacking and consuming the living. Whilst Jill was able to survive her first encounter with the undead with help from Barry, the two would soon find out that other members of Star's team, including Forrest from Bravo Team, had not been so lucky. On making this horrific discovery, their former friend pecked to death by crows, they decided to separate and search the mansion as quickly as possible. They came across more of the living dead, and Jill would soon discover that it wasn't only humans affected by this horrific disease. And it wasn't long before Jill found another member of their team that had succumbed to another vile attack. Richard pleaded with her to find the antidote for something that had clearly poisoned him, and while she was able to find it, by the time she returned it was too late, and he died in front of her very eyes. However, Jill would not have long to grieve his loss. Soon she herself would come face to face with the very creature that had killed her friend. The massive leviathan of a snake attacked her, and soon she would have to put an end to this creature before it did the same to her. Fortunately, she was able to survive the attack and wound the creature fatally. Jill would continue to be confronted with oversized abominations such as lion-sized tarantulas, a host of ferocious sharks, and even plant life that seemed intent on devouring any human it came in contact with, an experience she only survived by reuniting with a flamethrower carrying Barry. After surviving this horrific ordeal, Jill is soon and briefly reunited with Albert Wesker. Whilst he makes his excuses as to his earlier absences, it's clear that Jill believes he has something of his own agenda. As Jill continues to search the mansion, she is confronted by even more hideous creatures and far more challenging puzzles that eventually lead her to deep below the mansion. Surviving an attack by a giant boulder, she's eventually introduced to something that even she wasn't expecting. Way below the mansion itself is a network of bizarre tunnels and labs. This is clearly where the experiments that she's been fighting against have been being worked on all along by the company known as Umbrella. With the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together, Jill becomes aware that the T-virus, an experimental virus made by Umbrella, is responsible for everything she has seen. Hacking into one of the computers, Jill sees the evidence of what she already expected. Each of the horrific nightmares that she's faced were specifically designed by Umbrella, and one she has yet to confront. the tyrant. Pressing on through this hellish nightmare, Jill eventually finds Chris and now has a focus. She has to rescue her friend. She proceeds back through the laboratories looking for the keycard she needs to save him and is finally reunited with Barry. Jill expresses her frustrations with Barry about him abandoning her earlier in the night. However, Barry makes his apologies and assures her that he is there to help and they want to rescue Chris. However, on returning back up to the main labs, instead of finding a keycard to save their friend, they find Wesker, and Barry pulls his gun on Jill. Wesker informs Jill that he has been working for and covering up Umbrella's experiments all along, and Barry himself has to do Wesker's bidding or his family will come to severe harm. Making their way into the main laboratory, Wesker introduces Jill to probably the biggest nightmare she has ever faced, Umbrella's ultimate weapon, the nightmarish tyrant. To Jill's horror, the arrogant and overconfident Wesker unleashes Tyrant, seeming adamant that this hideous monster he's created can be controlled. However, the Tyrant does not want to be controlled by anything. Shattering the glass and making its way down, the monster initially turns towards Jill, filling her with fear and terror, before turning to its left, and to Wesker's shock and horror, the creature instead attacks Wesker, killing him outright and throwing his carcass to the ground. With a mixture of skill, her training, and a host of weapons that Jill has found during her adventures around the mansion, she is able to defeat the tyrant, or at least put the creature down long enough to escape and return to find the one person she knows she can still trust, Chris Redfield. As the two make their way out of the mansion towards the helipad, they find Barry, who is now fatally wounded. With his last breath, he apologises to Jill, expressing his shame and regret for putting her life at risk. He asks her to tell his family that he loves them, before finally succumbing to his injuries. Finally making it to the helicopter pad of the installation, they're able to signal for retrieval. And with the nightmare finally behind them, Jill rests her head onto Chris, clinging to the one friend she still has. But whilst they would be forgiven for thinking the nightmare was over, it's only just beginning. Thanks for everyone who's watched this. I want to make it clear that within the Resident Evil game, there are a host of different decisions that can be made that change the outcomes of the story as it goes along. Whilst I'm well aware this isn't the main canon version of the storyline, it is the version that my recent playthrough on my channel presented me with, so it felt like the most appropriate one to show. Until next time, thank you very much for watching, and of course, take the high ground.